I hear all the time, oh, how it's so hard to garden on the coast here. And it is true, you don't have much soil. But that's true with a lot of Vancouver Island, except for maybe the Cowichan Valley and the Comox Valley. No place on the island really has soil. When we did our Organic Master Gardener course here and we did a soil texture test, the soil textures on this, even just on the Estewister Peninsula, were so widely varied. On this side it was sandy, on this side it was more clay. So it is challenging in that way, but saying that, I've had some of my best gardens here. Now, if you love growing tomatoes and eggplant and peppers, you better start looking at a greenhouse, because that is a little bit more difficult here. If you choose the right varieties, sometimes you can get away with it, depending on the summer. But if you like greens and brassicas, spinach, lettuce, pak choi, bok choy, cilantro, Swiss chard, kale, if you like cauliflower, I had beautiful cauliflower here and I've never been able to grow it since. Last year was my first year, actually. I really had to nurse it along. But what's good about here is it has these even kind of temperatures. I mean, yeah, it felt really cold on Friday when I was outside all day pruning in the snow, but it's still, the range does not fluctuate wildly. So as wildly as the other side, where I had a stretch of 15 below for a week in Qualicum Beach. You know, not all of Qualicum Beach had that, but I was just in this lucky little ecosystem that got that cold, and so that really compromised my winter garden. But here, I don't think in history it's gotten to 15 below. So, you know, not in any time. I lived here for 10 years. It never even got close. Might have snowed once or twice. But, so you have some opportunities here that other people don't have. The fluctuation of temperatures can cause things to bolt easily. Plants don't like that. They like even temperatures. Another advantage that you have, and I know it might not sound like an advantage, but you have a foggy August. How is that an advantage, you might be thinking? Because you can seed your winter garden in August when I can't, because it's so stinking hot on the other side of the island that most of the seeds of the plants that live through the winter won't even think of germinating in August. But here they do, and nicely. They're always bathed in moisture. So you do have some advantages. So yeah, probably not so much the peppers, but Brussels sprouts, any of the cabbages, collards, all that sort of thing works really good. And there's lots of different ways to eat food from your garden year round. I love this. I'm happy in the garden. So for one thing, everywhere can do this. Just take seeds and seed them in a flat, whether they're sunflowers or some kind of brassicas, and do mini greens. I mean, this is the simplest way to get nutrition. If a lettuce, it is true that lettuce will lose about 50% of its nutrition day one. So you can imagine by the time it gets to the coast, and then by the time it gets to your plate, it probably doesn't have much nutrition. It has really good fiber still, but it probably doesn't have a whole lot of nutrition. So by using that as a base and then adding a little bit of these microgreens, and I mean with the sunflowers, if you grow 1 or 2 sunflowers, you have enough seeds to do this. You get a lot of seeds out of 1 or 2 sunflowers, so it's really cost effective as well. And then you can add these to your salads to make it more nutritious. So there's lots of different seeds to sprout. Fenugreek seeds. I was just listening this morning to Yarrow Willard. Some of you might have heard of him. He's a pretty renowned herbalist. And he was talking how important fenugreek is for our guts and how it really can help with things like Crohn's disease or any kind of intestinal problems, because it forms like a mucus that traps a lot of the toxins in our intestines and then removes it. So this is another one that works really good for sprouts. And then there's chickpeas, onion sprouts, all kinds of things. And if you grow even one plant and let it go to seed of any of these things, you'll have so many seeds that you can plant them, you can sprout them, you can do all kinds of things with them. When I was younger, there was such a thing called chia pets. And there were these little terracotta pets that were impregnated with chia seeds, and then the chia seeds would sprout and it'd be all furry. And I don't think anyone ever actually ate them, but you could. So any of these things are easy to turn into sprouts, especially if you save your own seeds. So you can do something really simple, like just, the old container that you got from your last set of, the clamshell that you got from your last set of greens. Really easy, because you don't have to keep it in there for long. You're not keeping it in there for long at all. A couple of weeks and you're harvesting. So you don't even have to worry about drainage as long as you watch your watering. So a really easy way to have nutrition year-round. And there's all kinds of books on how to do it. So it's really quite easy. You want it at least 2 inches deep with a good diameter, good quality potting mix, but they don't even need any nutrition because they're working off the nutrition that's already in the seed. When you see a seed, it's a little miracle actually. It's got a little embryo in it, plus it's got a little packet of food in it called the endosperm. And so that's why seeds that are really old might not germinate as well or be as vigorous, because over time that little embryo is still alive and it's respiring, and what it's doing is it's using up the food. And so that's why seeds get old and don't sprout. Now if you keep your seeds in the fridge, this slows the respiration rate down so they don't use up their food so fast. But you just scatter the seeds, you don't have to be careful about it, and then just water it and put it where it only gets even 4 hours of sunlight. And that's all you need for microgreens. You don't need to fertilize them. They're rarely bothered by pests and diseases because you're just letting them get about this big and then you're harvesting them. So that is the easiest thing that you can do year-round. And there's lots of different things you can use for this. The mesclun mix that you buy, sunflowers, corn salad is a good one, onions, chive, garlic, parsley, miner's lettuce, midbuna, which is, if anybody finds midbuna seeds, I haven't been able to find them the last few years. They're green, that's like a strap-like dark green leaf that is fabulous. So I would really like to get my hands on some again. Peppercress, chickweed, chia, chervil, mustard, kale, endive, arugula, beet greens. Beets are good because there's actually 3 little seeds in every seed capsule. So you get a lot of greens from that. Same with chard. Tatsoi, radish greens, watercress, mizuna, peas, cabbage, basil, and any of the lettuces. So they are all really good for microgreens. And then there's growing stuff outdoors. So crops to grow in the winter. Arugula, actually for me, even on the other side of the island, does better planted starting in June. It even overwinters for me reliably. Now if you have some kind of way of protecting it, like a cold frame, which I highly recommend that you do, when we looked at the elementary school cold frame, the arugula that's lived through the winter had leaves that were as big as my hand, just from that little bit of extra protection. But it really does arugula actually likes shorter days and it likes cooler temperatures. You will actually get more leaf, and the arugula won't go to seed so quickly if you plant it during the cooler temperatures. So you can sow densely, but then thin vigorously, and I always do that. I don't do the plant one every inch or every 2 inches. I kind of seed like this for my greens, because which would you rather do? Weed or clip and harvest greens and eat them? I mean, some weeds are edible as well, but I seed heavily. And if you're going to do that, you do have to thin, because if the plant's leaves start to touch, then their roots are touching and they're competing. So don't be afraid to get in there with scissors and just thin, 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 and then the leaves will grow again and they'll touch, and then thin out every other, row again, and keep doing that. When I'm growing these outside and I'm harvesting little baby greens, what I do is I bring a bowl of water out with me. Especially if you're doing it on a really sunny day, you can harvest these little baby greens, and in no time at all, especially if it's like windy or something, what happens is that they dry and they kind of start shrinking, and if there's any soil on them, it shrinks it right into the leaf kind of thing. But by throwing it right into a bowl of water, the soil, any soil that is on them, washes off right away. So that works really good, and especially in a place where you get that heavy rainfall and your soil is washing up onto your leaves, it really helps to go out with a bowl of water and harvest right into that bowl. So this, even in Qualicum, even after my 15 below for a week in November, I still have arugula that live through the winter, and it is still harvestable. But if you really want big leaves, gorgeous big leaves, a little bit of crop protection works really well. And what I'll do is I'll send this to Leah. So that you'll have all the recipes and all this information that she can pass on. Beets are another one. Beets are good for both roots and greens. Winter keeper beet was one of my biggest successes here on the coast. And it got about this big and stayed tender. I couldn't believe it. It stayed so tender. So it likes a little bit later of a sowing, but the good part is that it will sit in the ground under mulch all winter long, and then you just have to kind of go out there, and in the winter you are more using your garden as a big refrigerator. And not much is going to actually grow in December and January, but the whole idea of winter gardening is to really heavily plant your garden from June until the beginning of October, like heavily plant it, and then harvest all winter long. And there's a few different advantages to that. Planting late, your soil here is already, it's just in that perfect stage of being warm enough that the seeds will germinate, but not so warm that the cool weather crops won't like to germinate. So it's just, I found that some of my best gardens here were actually planted in June, instead of struggling with that early cold, wet soil. So it's the same with the beets. I really like yellow beets too, that's another one. And so there's a beet salad. This is one side of my house. This box is now gone because as I was watering it, it was actually flooding my basement. So, which I wouldn't have cared, but my husband was all upset, so we had to take the box down. I mean, the plants first, the house second, right? I've actually bought houses, and my husband said to me, "Oh, you were only in the house 2 minutes." And I said, "Was there a house on it?" That had nice water and it had nice growing conditions, right? So these are broad beans, and broad beans, I personally don't like the beans, okay? Some people love the beans and they make wonderful hummus out of them, and some people love broad beans. I don't like them because they're too much work. You have to peel the pod, and then you have to peel the other pod off them, and so I don't really like them all that much. But what I discovered is that the leaves of broad beans are edible and excellent. They have like a bit of a nutty flavor, and look at how this thing produces. Like, this was planted in October, and this is now, you know, in the spring. I mean, look at all those greens. And I can always find someone to give the broad beans to. The other thing is, these are legumes, and so they add nitrogen to the soil, which is really important here with areas of high rainfall, because your nitrogen is the most soluble element, and it is the one that's going to wash out of your garden first. So by having something like this in your garden over the winter, it's going to lock up any of the nutrients that are going to wash away and actually add nitrogen rather than let the nitrogen go away. So using this as a cover crop is a wonderful thing, even if you don't let them get this big, even if you're just harvesting them for salad greens or whatever. I think you'll really like them. I actually slipped them in the boxes we were producing for Tug, and they loved them at the restaurants. So, you know, it really worked out good. So broccoli, lots of different kinds of broccoli, but the one that really reliably overwinters is the sprouting broccoli. So purple sprouting broccoli, for one, it's got this nice purple color full of antioxidants, all real, anything that's highly colored, right, is better for you. And, you know, we're facing all these, you know, epidemics and stuff, and the best way to protect yourself is to eat right, and eat in colors, eat the rainbow kind of thing. And so the purple sprouting broccoli is really nice and nutritious, and it just keeps pumping out these little broccolis. You're not going to get a big fat head of broccoli, but hey, I don't know, I eat a lot of vegetables, and to get through a whole big head of broccoli, you know, for the two of us, it takes a couple meals. So it's losing nutrition the whole time. It sits in my fridge. I start to look at my fridge as like death row for vegetables. Like it's just sitting there and not improving. So I like to kind of, you know, my perfect scenario is to go out the garden, pick, and then eat. And with the purple sprouting broccoli, it is a really good one for that, because you cut off these and then more just keep forming. So you can plant this in July and then put the transplants out in August. If you're planting seeds from any of this, and it is really, say, well, Tofino is hardly ever really hot, right? But if it's extra warm because of weird climate change stuff or something, just do it in the shade, and that's enough to kind of moderate the temperature. So plant them in packs or something in the shade. And then in August, when they are going to get bathed by fog for the whole month, is a lovely time to transplant them. So put transplants out in August. And the beauty of doing this over winter garden is that, you know, we're so conditioned, like most of Canada, you plant your garden the end of May, right? That's what our parents did and our grandparents did. And the May long weekend, you plant your garden. Well, that's fine for places that, you know, have a short growing season. They pretty well have to do that. But for us, it's actually beneficial to have the stuff growing over the winter because it's a more efficient use of water. So by planting this, and when other people are just planting their garden in May, you're eating from your garden. And you've been eating from your garden for months. A lot of these overwintering vegetables, they'll start producing in February and March, when other people are just starting to plant. And you're eating already. And so there's nothing wrong with companion planting. So this will, I've had broccolis, even at my place, live for 3 years. If they're healthy enough and if you feed them. My thing is always, if you take something from the plant, try to give something back. So if you have a handful of compost, you harvest some broccoli, feed the plant a handful of compost. Put a little seaweed around it. If you have any kind of mulch, put some mulch around it. Make some weed fertilizer. Weeds make excellent fertilizer. Throw them in a bucket, let them rot, and then water the plant with it.
Do you wash your seaweed first thing?
No, I have
throw it on with the
never
salt?
washed my seaweed.
Really?
In fact, you can water your garden with seawater once a year.
Oh.
No problem. It's got minerals, and the other minerals in the seawater actually buffer the sodium chloride.
Okay.
So I mean, if you did it every day, if you watered your vegetables with seawater every day, it might be too much.
Yeah.
But the occasional isn't bad, and I have never washed my seaweed, and I've never had a problem. And I've hauled a lot of seaweed and put it on my garden. The other thing, I just want to clear up the myth right away, cedar sawdust is okay. So if you want to mulch with cedar, I've done it so many times now, and I've got a pile of stories I could tell that would bring me way past the time that I'm supposed to be speaking about using cedar and having no problem with it. So that's another myth that's good to know. Another good, strong early broccoli is green Goliath. Cilantro Rob is good, and then the classic is Calabrese. And it's the Calabrese broccoli that actually lasted 3 years for me. So it just kept going. You know, and maybe the sprouts got smaller, but there they were. And then what happened is it actually sent out a whole new stalk from the bottom and started growing again. So, yeah, so you can keep broccoli going. And we have the tendency to, you know, kind of right away, when a plant slows down, to yank it out, and sometimes we have to because we don't have a lot of room, but lots of times if you leave it, it'll actually surprise you. And this is a purple sprouting broccoli. The stem actually flopped onto the ground, and then there's these little broccolis coming up from it, and so I selected the best looking one, peeled the other ones off. The other part of the plant was actually going to seed, and this was sprouting new plants. Same when you cut a cabbage or collard greens. If you cut a cabbage right down to the bottom of the head, what will happen is it'll shoot out 4 more little cabbages, and they're so cute. They're about this big. And what I do is I'll remove 3 of them right away and just let 1 grow. And sometimes I'll get 2 or 3 cabbages out of 1 plant. So don't be so quick to kind of pull everything out. That whole clean up your garden thing, is a bit over the top. And we don't really need to do that. Especially if you mulch and build up your soil. Brussels sprouts is a wonderful vegetable, and there's a purple one of these too that's really wonderful. So you can plant these in June and transplant in August. I like to do a summer solstice planting of a bunch of stuff, just because it feels right, celebrate the solstice by planting things. But there's another reason for it too. Things like Chinese cabbages, like pak choy and bok choy, if you had trouble growing those, they really don't like increasing day length. What they like is decreasing day length or short day length. So by planting them June 21st, which is the summer solstice, they're going to experience that short day length. And even seeds in the ground can experience day length. They can see through the bits of the soil, and they know that the days are either longer or shorter. So if you plant a lot of these things on the solstice, for one, it's it jogs your memory, right? For another thing, for me, it's become a ritual. I plant my garlic on Thanksgiving. I plant my, winter garden, a lot of it on the summer solstice. And, so I really like doing things like that. And certainly you can harvest into the winter. Again, the 15 below temperature in Qualicum sort of burned the outside leaves of my Brussels sprouts, but they kept going, and I just had to peel off the outside. So some of these things take up a lot of space in your garden for a long time. So they might not be ideal for a small garden. Like the Danish bald head, you get a big cabbage from this. So if you like making things like sauerkraut or something, all you probably need for your sauerkraut for the year is 1 or 2 of these cabbages, either Danish bald head, which is here, or the January King. They take 120 days, so they're in your garden for a really long time, but when you consider that you probably are getting your year's supply of sauerkraut out of 1 or 2 plants, it kind of makes it worthwhile. So Danish bald head takes 120 days. January King, I don't have a picture of January King, but it's actually the most gorgeous cabbage going. It's red and purple and green and gorgeously streaked, and it's just lovely. So you can plant that in early July, and you can leave it in the garden and harvest it any time between when it's ready and March. So great for your Christmas dinner or even your Valentine's dinner. So, and better than leaving your garden open to the elements all winter long. It's actually better to have something growing on your soil, even if it's weeds. It's better to have something growing on your soil than nothing. Leaving your soil bare, your soil is just washing away, especially with the kind of rain that you get here. Another one that's good to know is Pixie. It's a small cabbage, so it's good for small gardens, and it matures in 45 days. And so you can get a really late crop and a really early crop. So you can get a couple of crops of small cabbage. And you know, if you've only bought cabbage from the store and you've never grown cabbage, you're in for a treat. I mean, coleslaw made from freshly harvested cabbage is like a whole other animal. It's like vegetable, I guess is the proper word. It is so delicious and so sweet and so full of nutrition, your fingers will tingle. So carrots. Carrots are great here as well because they'll stay in the ground for as long as you like. I have had great success with carrots, except for something called the carrot fly, until I discovered that if I surrounded my carrots with onions, whether they be green onions or chives or Egyptian walking onions or any member of the onion family, if I completely surrounded them with onions, so I'd do a row of onions and a row of carrots, then a row of onions, and then a row of carrots. And how I know this works for sure is the first year I tried it, I didn't put onions around the edges of the bed, and those were the only ones that got carrot fly. The ones that weren't actually surrounded by the onions. And so that's worked really consistently for me the last couple of years. To keep out the carrot fly is to surround them with any kind of onion you can find. Carrots are actually way sweeter harvested in the winter than they are harvested in the summer. Another thing is by planting your carrots later, you can avoid some of the common carrot pests because they finished their life cycle, they finished laying eggs. So Bolero, Scarlet Nantes works good. Baby carrots are great because you can do them in containers. So if you're short of garden space, when I do containers too, I know I always get cheap when it comes to buying a lot of soil, probably because also the soil you buy is kind of low quality most of the time compared to, compost and that. So what I'll do with a big pot is, or even a medium-sized pot, is I'll take a bunch of organic matter and shove it in the bottom of the pot first. Then if I can get my hands on just even a couple of worms from somebody's compost, I'll put the worms in there to eat all that stuff, and then I'll put the soil on top of it. So you can use sawdust in the bottom, any kind of organic matter, sawdust, leaves, weeds. If you're worried about the weeds, then I'll put a couple of sheets of newspaper in between the weeds and the rest of the soil. And so it helps you fill your pot economically, and also gives like a slow release fertilizer in the bottom, so when those roots get into that decomposing material, they have access to all those nutrients. So it's way better than just using a regular potting soil. So these baby carrots are great for containers, and if you mulch them, put the containers right up against the house, again, you can just use this as, use your pot as a refrigerator. They're not going to grow in the winter, but you can keep harvesting them. This is a beautiful purple cauliflower called Purple Cape. And I have found that things that are red and purple also are hardier in the winter. I don't know why that is, but it's even true when we were, I worked at the university for 20 years as a technician and instructor, and we grew 4 seedlings for reforestation. And we would plant more than 1 seed in a cavity, and then we would thin, and the one we would always leave is the one that had the red stem, because that was shown to be one of the hardiest ones. So it seems to translate throughout the plant world that anything with a red or a purple color seems to be that little bit tougher and hardier. And so you can plant in July, transplant it in August, and then you'll be eating cauliflower in February. So lots of times these plants don't get very big when they overwinter, but then when the day length starts to increase again, February, you'll see rapid growth in February and early March. So don't, again, if you're going into the winter and your plant is just little, don't give up on it. For one, it's better to have your plant in there rather than nothing. For another thing, you've got a chance of really getting a really wonderful plant to eat once it starts to grow again. So Nomad is another one. It takes a really long time. And I'm not going to kid you, cauliflower is hungry. Out of all the brassicas, it's the one that likes the most nutrition. So if you know that your soil isn't great, cauliflower might not be for you. The other thing you can do in the winter is plant the cauliflower on top of your compost pile. So, then it has lots of nutrition. So cauliflower, it can be a little bit tricky. I also find that open pollinated seeds of any kind are more reliable than hybrids, because most hybrids have been bred for industry, not for the home gardener, because that's where the big market is. So so they'll be bred for things like shippability or storageability, but in home gardener, or uniformity, that's another one. So, but a home gardener doesn't want uniformity. You don't want 10 broccoli maturing all at once. You'd rather have an open pollinated one where you might get a broccoli this week, and then you might get a broccoli next week, and then the week after. So the uniformity is useless for a home gardener unless you're doing a big canning or preserving kind of thing. Then a hybrid seed might be better. And it's the same with these cauliflowers. I find that the hybrid ones sometimes are tricky, whereas the open pollinated ones are not so fussy. Because when you think of people in the industry, they're making money on this, so they're fussing around their plants more. They're ensuring the conditions are right. Because they make money from it, they're able to put a lot of money into it to make sure their soil is good and make sure everything is perfect. The home gardener, not so much so. If you're looking at all the water you're spending, if you're buying a bunch of soil, if you're buying a bunch of fertilizer, sure, you're getting your food back, but in my experience, one or the other partner in the relationship will often say, but wait a minute, isn't this costing more than buying it in the store? So, by being reasonable about it, you can kind of mitigate that, and justify to yourself more, to grow these things. So, open pollinated seeds rather than hybrid seems to work really good. So here's a series of cauliflower that you plant in April or May, and then you harvest in March and April. So they're in your garden for a whole year. So if you have a small garden, this might not work. But the thing that is good about this whole series is that they're really drought resistant. So they'll stand that dry period in the summer. And so they won't just button up, which means what happens is that these kind of curds just separate and they form little separate flowers rather than a big head. And that's a common problem with any kind of cauliflower under stress. Cilantro. My best cilantro is grown in the autumn. It does not bolt as fast. So if you plant cilantro, well, I just let my cilantro plants go to seed and they self-seed, and I have a whole patch where cilantro just keeps coming up. It even was coming up in the grass around my garden beds. So, you know, if you let it go, I find with a lot of plants, what happens when a plant produces seeds? It produces so many seeds. Some of them are going to be superior and some are going to be inferior. When a seed company harvests seeds, they'll just harvest them all and they'll send them to you. Even when I save my own seeds, even though I've picked the best plant and everything, some seeds are going to be superior, some seeds are going to be inferior. And so by letting things just go to seed, what happens is the inferior ones don't come up, but the stronger ones do come up. So it's always a really cool thing to let a couple of plants of everything that you grow go to seed. And you'll find that they come up at the oddest times. Like the cilantro, I could have cilantro coming up that's self-seeded, and I could plant cilantro right next to it, and it'll take like a month for that cilantro seed to germinate. There's some seeds that really like that cold stratification before they germinate. And cilantro seems to be one of them. They like going through those cold temperatures. So letting things go to seed, planting them in the fall, they're less likely to bolt. Why can they grow cilantro in hot climates? Because the day length is shorter. Cilantro is another one of those plants that responds to day length. And so in the winter, the day length is shorter. So you're going to get bigger plants of cilantro before they go to seed. Collards. Who's grown collards? Underrated usually. You know, they're really good. And if you like making cabbage rolls, they're actually easier to make cabbage rolls from collards than they are from cabbage, because you don't have to pull the whole head apart. You just harvest how many leaves that you want and roll them up with other whatever stuffing that you like. They need no protection. They're tough as nails. They do send out broccoli-like flowers. Almost all the brassicas will send out broccoli-like flowers when they actually do finally go to seed. And yeah, they taste like cabbage, but they're easier to grow. And there's lots of recipes for them because collards are grown round the world. Heat, cold, they don't seem to care. Corn salad is another one that's really underrated, and it's really hardy in the winter. It will not germinate under hot temperatures, but it will definitely germinate under cooler temperatures. So whenever the soil is cool, try planting a little bit of corn salad. Places like the coast, it will easily breeze through the winter. It actually is a wild plant that grows wild in a lot of places. And so it's a really easy one and really tasty. Bright light chard. Plant until late August, or any kind of chard, but this happens to be a picture of bright light chard. Plant until late July for winter harvest. Chard is one thing that you can plant pretty well year round. So, and then just harvest the outside leaves. With any of these winter greens, you will get more leaf to eat if you just harvest the outside leaves all the time. So continually harvest the outside leaves. What happens is that the inside leaves are actually better at photosynthesizing than the older leaves. The younger leaves are always better at photosynthesizing. So the older leaves, if we keep removing them, it actually stimulates the growth of the younger leaves, which are more efficient at photosynthesizing. So you'll actually get more to eat off a plant if you just harvest the outside leaves. And with celery as well, you can just, if you grow celery, it pretty well lives right year-round here, and you can just break off 1 or 2 stems as you need it. You don't have to cut the whole thing down to the ground and harvest the whole thing. When we were watching that movie Friday night, it was shocking. What was that movie called? Just Eat It.
Yeah.
And it was about food waste, and they were showing this celery field. And for one, celery, if it's not organic, is sprayed and sprayed and sprayed. It's like sprayed 17 times or something in its lifetime, which I can't figure out why, because it grows so easily here. But I guess they're trying to grow it someplace where it doesn't grow as easily, or the monocrop thing, or what, but celery is really sprayed a lot. So, for one thing, it was that, and then, in this movie, they had, because it has to fit in the bag for the wholesaler, they're cutting all this celery off the outside and just letting it sit on the ground. It was shocking how much of the celery they actually cut off and is just wasted because it won't fit in the bag. So, really another good thing to grow. So harvesting the outside, this also is good as small greens, as baby greens, really a good vegetable to grow. Endive and radicchio, they're the bitters. And some people will say, oh, I don't like bitter. But bitter is so good for your liver. And Europeans love all this stuff, the radicchio and the endive, even if it's quite bitter. So even if you include just a little bit in your salads, again, you just have to harvest the outside leaves and rip it up small and put a little bit in there, because it's an excellent liver tonic, and the liver controls, oh God, dozens of functions in our body, and a part of a good immune system. So, we're talking again about these viruses spreading. Include a little bit more bitter in your diet. Dandelion greens, endive, radicchio. And these are so easy to grow, and they'll just sit there all winter long. If you grow a mesclun mix, sometimes they have them in there, and everything else will have died off, and there's a little radicchio sitting there, just happy as can be. Endive is related to dandelion, actually, and you can see that by the greens. But what some people do is they actually plant the greens, plant endive in the spring, and then dig up the roots, put them in pots, and force them over the winter. So here they are dug up, the greens are cut off and eaten, and they're put in these terracotta pots, and then kept cold until you want to force them. And here's this very happy guy with his pot of endive. So how you force them is you take them from the cold place that you've had them, and you put them in a warm place, but the beauty of it is if you want them to stay sweet, they don't need any light. In fact, they shouldn't be exposed to any light. So you can have them in the darkest place ever as long as it's a little bit warmer. In fact, quite often what they'll do is they'll put another pot on top of it. So the plant will start to grow in the warmer place, but because it's shaded from light, it won't get dark green and it won't get bitter. And one of these cut in half and drizzled with a little olive oil in the winter, fabulous. So you can control when you force them. You could have pots of this sitting outside, with the tops cut off, and then bring them inside one at a time, even if you put them under your sink, and force them, and then have a beautiful meal of this wonderful endive. So there's good instructions online how to do this. So this is, easy, easy, easy. And because it's related to dandelion, you can imagine how easy it is to grow. If you have soil that has dandelions in it already, it's definitely going to grow endive. So it just takes a couple of weeks. Kale is my favorite. Anyone who's ever been to my house will probably see hundreds of kale plants everywhere. In fact, one of my students brought me a sign that says Kale Street to hang up on my fence. And I eat kale every single day. Yep.
So do I. But you know what gets me is when you get a nice fresh leaf and you start crunching, you see, oh, there's a slug under this leaf.
Yeah. Do you mulch?
Sort of.
So what I've discovered over time is that slugs actually prefer eating mulch to eating your plants. So you will have more slugs in your garden, but they won't eat your plants as much. For one, the mulch remediates the conditions that cause the plant to stress. It prevents temperature fluctuations in both summer and winter. It prevents drought stress. And all those things, the stressed plant is the one that's going to attract the insects. And any kind of insect or slug, their job is to remove the weaker plants from the gene pool. That is their whole purpose on the planet. And sometimes the plants, sometimes you can't avoid it, right? Sometimes crazy weather conditions, and because we as gardeners like to grow stuff that doesn't really like to grow where we live, but we want to eat it, so we grow it. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that plants are stressed. But I find that if you start by asking yourself that question, okay, there's a slug on my plant. There's an aphid on my plant. Why is this plant not 100% happy? And sometimes the answer is obvious. You know, sometimes you'll remember that last week you didn't water because you were too busy, or you'll remember that the seeds were old to begin with, or you'll remember that maybe I should have put compost on this bed before I planted. You know, so there's all those kinds of things. But I find with mulch really helps a lot of different problems. The other thing is, if I start seeing a whole bunch of plants in a bed, one has slugs or one has aphids and the other ones don't, I'll pull that one out right away and eat the whole thing. And then let the other ones go to seed. So you know how kale gets those woolly aphids in the summer? I now have aphid-resistant kale, because every plant that got aphids, I just yanked it out of there and ate the whole thing. And I let the ones go to seed, even if they were smaller, that didn't get aphids. And now, over the years, by doing that, I get plants that are stronger. Now, my ecosystem is different than your ecosystem, which is why locally grown seeds, as local as possible, is always the best bet, because they're adapted to your particular conditions. You know, I might take seeds from here and bring them to my place. Well, it's going to be too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter. And that's the trouble when you buy seeds from like Stokes Seeds or something, right? Growing, you know, if they've produced these seeds in Ontario, well, how different are the conditions in Ontario than here? And so by slowly, you know, you don't have to let everything go to seed, but, you know, with things through, say, Tofino Food Initiative, you can kind of say, okay, you know, you've got this, you know, mailing list, and maybe you can coordinate it, say, well, I'll save a broccoli plant this year, if you save a kale plant, if you save one chard plant, you don't have to do it all. In a small community like this, everybody can decide, well, I'm going to grow, you know, or talk to your friends, or, you know, form a little garden club and say, everybody save one thing for the year. And then you get locally adapted seeds. And then the seed swap table next year is going to be overflowing with stuff. And that's what you want. So this is my favorite kale. And I got the seeds from Mrs. Matterson, which she was the wife of the first mayor of eucalyptus. And there's Madison's Tea House now. That was one of my first gardening jobs, is gardening for Mrs. Madison. And she gave me, even before I went back to school or anything, and she gave me seeds for this red Russian kale. I still am saving the seeds today from that kale, and that was in 1974.
Wow.
So, excellent kale. It comes up all over the place in my yard. I actually have trouble germinating lacinato. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it knows that I like red Russian best. You know, the vibes aren't there for me. You know, maybe if you like lacinato better, it'll germinate better for you. But if your lacinato doesn't germinate, remember what I said. So there's lots of different kinds of kale. There's no excuse here not to have kale. It just drives me crazy when I go to the grocery store and see kale there. I mean, because you could grow kale in a pot this small. You know, it will adapt to anything that you throw it. So more kale, and more kale, and more kale, and more kale. I really think that kale is something that everybody needs to grow. And then, after it finishes and overwinters, what happens when it goes to seed is it sends out these broccoli-like flower heads. And I'll harvest broccoli-like flower heads for 2 or 3 months before I even plant my broccoli. So, you know, lots of food year-round. And then if you save some of the seeds, if you let it go to flower, for one, when a kale plant is flowering, or any of the brassicas are flowering, they're full of bees. Like, they are so full of bees, you don't want to disturb them almost. And then you get tons of seeds. Out of one plant, you'll get a jar like this. Most brassica seeds will last for 4 years. So again, trading with your neighbors and, you know, and then you can also sprout the seeds. So you can use them for sprouts and mini greens. More kale. I just really love kale. And then there's even this beautiful ornamental kale that is great for even bouquets. Yeah?
Okay, so I tried to save my kale seeds and they went moldy. What am I doing?
So probably what happened, and that could be more of a problem here on the coast because of your weather. And so what I would do is I would harvest them when the pods start to shatter, so you can see some of them opening.
Okay.
And then I would bring them inside and I would actually dry them by like the heater or the wood stove or something.
Okay, that's what I didn't do.
Yeah, yeah, in this climate especially. Like mine went moldy this year as well. Just because I thought, oh, my guy brought home this great canvas bag and I thought, oh, I can fill it with kale seeds. You know, but it retained too much moisture, and you know, dry them even overnight. That's all it takes, you know. And then the other thing, you can put them in a paper bag. You can take the stalks and put the separate stalks in paper bags, and then bring them in the house. And the paper bag allows some air circulation, will absorb some moisture, and then the heat of the house will kind of keep them dry. So plant seeds July, transplants in August. Actually, you can plant kale anytime. And there's a great sauce, so you'll have access. There's a whole movement, eat more kale. And there's pictures of people in front of the Eiffel Tower, in front of the, you know, in front of all these landmarks, you know, with the eat more kale shirt on. Kohlrabi. I have a friend that grows 10-pound super smelts kohlrabi. And he does feed it a lot, but kohlrabi is a really interesting vegetable if you've never tried it. It's good for a roasted vegetable, and it's good for cutting raw and eating with veggie dips kind of alongside your typical carrots and celery, which I get dead tired of after a while. It gets sweeter with frost, so it is actually a vegetable that grows better if you plant it late and then into the fall and let those frosts sweeten it. What happens with vegetables that live through the winter is that they, why they can live through the winter is that they're replacing the water in their tissues with sugars. Because when water freezes, it expands and bursts cells. But if it's replaced a lot of the water in its tissues with sugars, then that's not going to expand when it freezes, or not to that great of an extent. And that's why vegetables are much sweeter after a frost. So another advantage, rather than trying to grow kohlrabi in the summer, I've harvested terrible kohlrabi in the summer. It's got that strong cabbagey flavor from the heat. If you harvest it in the winter after the first frost, it's amazing. It's delicious. So, you know, this is another vegetable that can extend your palate and extend your season. And there's a recipe for roasted kohlrabi. Giant red mustard. This is dead easy to grow. And it lived through again my 15 below in Qualicum, in North Qualicum. And so if it's going to do that, I don't like eating this in the summer. I find it too hot and spicy. If you like hot and spicy, you might really enjoy it in the summer. But again, after the first frost, any of the mustard greens, but especially this red one, it sweetens right up and it's still got that spicy flavor, but it's not like burn your mouth spicy. Really tasty stuff. Highly recommend this as a green, full of nutrition. It's one of the ones that are right up there with kale. And you know, if we're going to resist all these weird diseases that are happening now, we have to improve our nutrition. There's no doubt about it. You know, vegetables at the bottom of your food pyramid, no matter what's on top. Your vegetables should be your major food. And by growing stuff like this, it is, again, dead easy. These, I dare you to fail with these. So, really, really good vegetable to, and leeks. So this guy is pretty upset because these leeks were supposed to go to one of those garden shows to win ribbons. And evidently someone sabotaged them.
Those people.
That's how competitive this growing vegetables for show is. But can you imagine the potato leek soup that's going to come out of that? Like, yummy. Like, wow. So, I mean, most of our leeks are not going to look like that, you know, without really devoting a lot of time and energy for them. But even if you don't devote a lot of time and energy from it, you can get some good edible product from it. You know, most people will say, oh, you only eat the white part. I don't get that. I eat the whole green part. Mind you, if they were this big, they might be a little bit tough. But the size of leeks that the average person is going to grow, you know, you can eat the greens as well. So you get the greens, you get the white leek part, and they're good in a cream sauce. They're good just the way they are, stir-fried. They're just a really tasty vegetable. So Bandit is a really extra hardy kind. There's also a beautiful purple one. I think it's called Northern Lights, that again is eating your colors and just looks gorgeous in the garden. They're really not fussy. They don't mind being crowded. I think the mistake that most people make with leeks is they actually plant them too far apart. Because they will actually survive being very close together. And then if they look like they're really getting crowded, you just pick every other one out, right? You can eat them when they're very young or wait until they're very old. I've even had leeks that overwintered, and then, well, any member of the onion family might do this for you, is they develop little bulbils on the bottom, and then they send out more plants. So you can harvest the big one, you can sort of separate it, dig it up, and separate the big one off, and then replant the little one. It works for green onions too. So here's the one, the Northern Lights. can be harvested in winter and well into the spring. And so this is gorgeous in your veggie pot. You could also put it in a flower bed. You know, you can grow leeks in containers really easily. And how gorgeous is that? I love it. Lettuces, all different kinds of lettuces. Continuity is an old favorite. French head lettuce, winter density is a good one. Cimarron, romaine type. Rouge de Hever is the red one. Again, the red ones seem to do really well. And it is good to cover the lettuce, but not enclose it. Sometimes if lettuce is enclosed in a cold frame, what will happen is that it will be more susceptible to fungal diseases, which are really prevalent at our temperatures here on the coast in the winter. So if you just do plant it under cover, so it's a good thing. Again, you can plant this in containers and pull it in just under an overhang by your house or by your front door, or lettuce will grow happily in containers. A little bit of good compost and off you go. You can plant them very close and then thin them out a little bit at a time. They're really wonderful. There's a lettuce breeder in Oregon named Frank Morton. If you see a lettuce in the seed catalog that says, bred by Frank Morton, buy it. He does lettuce torture trials. So he plants lettuce under the worst possible conditions, and the stuff that grows for him, he then takes and he brings to the local high school, and he has the students choose which tastes best. So can you imagine? That's like a double torture test, right? And then he'll take that type, and that's the type he'll continue to breed. So he's really done a lot of work with lettuce. One of his favorites that I've grown in multiple different climates. I've grown it in Hawaii, I've grown it in cold climates, I've had reports of it growing in really cold climates, I've grown it in Nanaimo, I've grown it in Qualicum. It's called Freckles. And it's green and it's got red splotches on it. Any of the ones that are green and red splotches, it looks a little funny. Some people say it looks really attractive. I think it looks a little funny, but it's tasty and it's really reliable. So that's really the main qualities that you want, right? Also, copper mesh if you really have a slug problem, because your growing conditions, I mean, let's face it, our growing conditions are always evolving. We're always working on improving them. In the meantime, anything copper will discourage slugs and snails. So even if you get one of those sort of copper scrubbies and tear it apart and put it around your plants, it will kind of discourage your slugs. This is that Mabuna I was talking about, and I love this stuff, and I wish I could find the seeds again. So if anyone finds the seeds, please let Leah know right away. There will be a reward because it is so good. One thing that I like about it, I mean, this is planted quite far apart, but what I like about it is that you can plant it really densely. It will stand really dense plantings without bolting from the stress of being crowded. So for a small garden, this is an ideal green. It's quite upright, and you can have them like right next to each other, and they just keep growing up rather than out. So really good green for a small garden and full of nutrition. The darker the green the leaf, the more nutrition it has. You can also, although it doesn't produce as much, but if it's starting to overcrowd, you can actually cut it right back to the ground and then let the other ones grow, and then it will come back again a couple of times. So you can do a cut and come again thing with it. Mizuna is a favorite. It comes in all kinds of different forms. I let these go to seed and I get even more different kinds. So I have some that are red. I had some that were red, had some that were green. Let them go to seed. Yeah, they cross-pollinated. Now I have some that are sort of reddish-green. And I have some that are fully green. And I have some that are hairy. I don't like hairy leaves, so I'll pull those right out and won't let those go to seed. because the hairy greens to me are more limited because I don't like the feel in my mouth, so I can't eat them raw. So, but they steam up good, they're excellent steamed up, but the smooth leaf ones I really like. So when they're young, they can grow in salads. When they're older, they can stir fry or you can steam them. They also live really well through the winter, and they grow really fast and really reliably. Another one you can do in containers, easily in containers. They don't stress out easy. Green onions. I find that one of the best varieties is Kincho, because it matures in about 50 days. It's also really, really hardy, and if you like the white part better than the green part, even though the green part has more nutrition, you can hill them up if you like. And one thing that you can do is just sow 5 to 10 seeds in a little 4-inch pot, put the whole thing in the garden, transplant the whole thing, and then just thin for your greens. Parsley. I'm really starting to think of parsley as a real vegetable, not just an herb. And if you've ever made like parsley pesto, you'd probably agree with me. Like basil will probably be a little harder to grow here because you don't have the heat, don't have the humidity, you have dry summer along with the heat. And but start making pesto out of other things. And parsley pesto is a great place to start. If you let one parsley plant go to seed, you'll probably have parsley coming up in between the cracks of your sidewalks the next year. So really great for just sort of regenerating itself. The curled varieties do better in winter than the flat leaf varieties. It also dehydrates better. So if you want a dry parsley for the winter, which lots of times it just keeps growing anyway, but if you want a dry parsley for the winter or for gifts or something, the curly parsley actually dries better. Yeah?
So I think I bought a bit of parsley from the local place here and put it in the ground and just sat there and then didn't expand. It didn't really grow all that well, and I thought, well, I mean, it's not as easy as kale.
Yeah, well, you know, lots of times when we buy plants, and this is no, Trina's a great grower. You know, she really, really is. She's very qualified to do it. But the reality is, whether you or I or the greatest grower on earth is growing plants in little containers, is that they will tend to dry out and they'll tend to get stressed. You're way better just throwing some parsley seeds out than buying a plant. And that's true with a lot of the greens. Spinach is another one. Does not really like transplanting. Some people do it successfully, but they know exactly when to do it. It can't sit in a container too long. That's what's wrong with cauliflower transplants too. They really like to be transplanted in a timely fashion. So just when the second leaves unfold. So the first leaves are the seed leaves, the second leaves are the true leaves. When those unfold, into the ground. And if you wait, chances are, whether it's you or the best grower on the planet, they're going to get stressed. They don't have enough room for the roots, they dry out easily, they get stunted, because remember, the top growth mirrors the root growth. So if the root growth is restricted, then the top growth is going to be restricted. That's how they make bonsais. Parsnips. Get really fresh seed with parsnips. Don't try to use old seed. Old seed, even fresh seed, takes a long time to germinate. I know people on the coast that grow amazing parsnips. So it is possible here, but you need good soil. So get some compost, make some compost. Great root vegetables. You can dig them all winter long. If you've never had them, they're really quite sweet and wonderful. So something to consider. Rutabagas too. I never liked rutabagas until I just cubed them and put them in water, boiled them with ginger root. And then I've loved them ever since. They're also easy to grow. They're exceptionally hardy. They'll stay in the ground. Again, I have a rutabaga that's about this big sitting in my garden now. I'm going to save seeds from it because it lived through that -15. The greens are good. Again, they're a bit hairy for me, except if they're cooked, then they're not bad. So you can plant these in June and July. So if you have, say, your broccoli that overwintered or some of your greens that overwintered, they'll start to go to seed in June and July. So that's the time you select your best plant to go to seed, you pull out the other ones and eat them, and then you plant things like your rutabagas, your next crop. I love this. I don't know how they did that, but it just is very rutabaga. Sorrel is a perennial, and it's usually my first salad green. Sorrel soup is wonderful. It can be invasive. So another one that will grow really fine in a container. You don't need to use up garden space. You can grow it in a container. Will grow in really poor soil. Really easy. This is another one I dare you to fail at, is sorrel. Early spring greens, great soups. Also pesto, another one that does pesto. And this pesto has got kind of a lemony flavor to it. When the leaves are really big and old, they're not all that great. They're kind of strong tasting and they have oxalic acid in them. But when they're really young, they're delicious and make wonderful pesto.
And hummus.
And hummus, I never thought of doing that. Oh, you know what else makes good hummus? Chickweed. Mix chickweed with chickpeas and the rest of the ingredients, and the chickweed has just enough of kind of this little lemony flavor. It's wonderful. Spinach. I also find, well, here you could probably grow spinach all year round, but I still find that overwintered spinach does the best for me. So by planting even till the end of October, you know, say from August to October, and your plants might only overwinter as, you know, a sizable loony plant, but then this time of the year they start to grow. And they won't bolt until May if your soil is good and they're not stressed. So I found that, you know, growing spinach over the winter, I actually get a better crop than trying to plant in cold soils and then have, even though spinach will germinate as low as 40 Fahrenheit, you know, it doesn't like hot weather. So and it doesn't like temperature fluctuations. So sometimes what happens is that all of a sudden a May long weekend or something, it gets really warm. It might get cold again after that, but that's when your spinach bolts. You know, if you've planted it really early. If you haven't planted it till May, it's really growing into the long days and hot temperatures. Spinach is another thing that really doesn't like those really long days that we have. But Olympia is a pretty good year-round spinach, and I really like it because the leaves are actually crunchy. And Bloomsdale's been around like forever, and it reliably overwinters, and then you harvest it in the early spring, even late winter. Samish is a good variety, and so is Thai. So they both are very good, tough plants. It seems like the crinkly ones do a bit better than the smooth leaf ones. Tips and techniques. Starting plants under lights, great thing to do. All you need is regular fluorescence, or even better now, LEDs. You don't need fancy grow lights anymore to grow things indoors year round. So really there was a LED bank of lights. It was about this big. It was $35 at Costco a couple of weeks ago. And it's going to run for years probably. You know, I've got on a timer. That's where I'm going to start a bunch of my stuff. Really beneficial to have a heat map. Ideal temperature is about 18 and 19 to 21. That will be sort of across the board. Some things like it a little cooler, some things like it a little warmer. But this range of temperature is really kind of good one. If you buy those heating mats, sometimes they have hot spots on them. You can feel some areas are hotter than others. The edges will dry out quicker. So it's good to lay a wet piece of cloth over the heating mat and then put your flats on it, because that will keep the moisture in the air as well as buffer those hot spots in the heating mat. And this is a really easy to build light bench, really easy to put together. You just hang your lights over here. I have mine on a timer so I don't have to worry about them. And in the winter, they don't need that much watering if your house isn't too warm. So, but inside, you can even grow things like basil. Because it's inside, it's protected from the wind. It's comfortable enough at the temperatures that we live at. Parsley, green onions, cilantro, salad greens, you can grow under lights year-round. And then there's saving seed, and we talked a lot about that already. Save your best plant, don't eat your best plant. Save only the best, save only open pollinated seeds. You don't know what you're going to get from hybrids. Be sure the seed is dry. Store the seed as cool as possible. And then always good to perform a germination test on any seed that you have to ensure that, I mean, let's face it, we don't have that much time. If you're sitting there waiting for your seeds to come up that will never come up, that's time wasted. So by taking, 10 seeds and putting them in, a wet paper towel and then putting them in some sort of covered container and seeing how many germinate, that doesn't mean you can't plant those seeds afterwards, but at least it gives you an idea of how fast your seeds will germinate and how many of your seeds will germinate, so that you know whether you should seed them more thickly or thinly. And you will say to yourself, like if inside they germinate in 14 days, say, you can kind of keep an eye on your ones outside, and if they haven't germinated in 14 days, you can go, maybe the birds ate them, maybe the mice ate them, maybe I need to seed again. So you haven't lost that much time. But if you're waiting and waiting and waiting even longer for them to germinate, then you could lose a whole window of opportunity where your garden is just empty when it could be full. So there's the kale seed pods. And by letting things self-seed, you encourage genetic diversity, and you develop varieties that are good for your location. Kale flowers are really good to eat. Crop protection, lots of different kinds. It can be just as fancy as these glass cloches, which cost a fortune. Look lovely, but are breakable and a pain in the butt because they're so heavy. Or they could just be plastic jugs, and you can take the lid off to let the air come through. I stick a stick down through so that they don't fly away. And sometimes it's just enough protection for those early things that you're putting in. These wall waters are relatively expensive, but if you're really hell-bent to grow some tomatoes, this might help you on the coast. The other thing you can do that I saw, did I include a picture of that or not? I probably should have. There's always things I have to leave out, darn it. But the other thing that I've seen is just plastic bottles. And I know you don't drink water in bottles anymore because that's not right. But you might find somebody who does. And collect the plastic bottles. And you just put the plastic bottles around the plant. And it creates a wall of water. So just line them up in a circle around your plant. And what happens is the water heats up during the day, and then it bathes the plant with the warmth that it's giving off later in the day and into the night. Because that's the trouble, is our nights on the coast are too cold. Right? The days, not bad, the nights get really cold. And even in August, lots of times the fog does kind of leave in the late afternoon, and so they'll heat up enough to hold that heat overnight and sometimes into the morning. So they're quite lovely. Lots of different styles of cold frame. The Arugula or the Tofino elementary school garden has a couple of different kinds of cold frames, really easy, some of them that you can go look at. And that always helps. And you can see the difference. The plants do appreciate the extra warmth. But there's some very simple designs of all kinds. We found that the tall plastic one here doesn't work as good because of the wind, right? So something that's a little lower to the ground works better. And something that's a little sturdier, like something like this, probably work better around here than something like this, where there's big sheets of plastic that are exposed to the wind. But that is a simple cold frame. And that's how the pipes are attached. And that's another one, so there's lots of different designs. And at the very least, I was talking to someone about this the other day, you can either take a tomato cage or a wire, a length of wire, put it around your plant with a tomato cage, put the tomato cage on top of your plant, drop a clear plastic bag over the top. What could be simpler? Really easy. Same with this. This actually is an old shower curtain, an old clear shower curtain, and that's some fencing, and I've just clothespin the thing on. And my husband hates when I do this, but this is how I get him to make me a cold frame. So unheated greenhouse is fine. I visited a property yesterday that had a jade plant and an avocado tree in an unheated greenhouse right in downtown Tofino. So you guys, I'm so jealous and I want to move back. I always want to move back. And then there's hotbeds. That's not really what it looks like. What it is you bury some manure or some working compost down deep, and the heat that rises from it will heat up these seedlings. So in the spring, that's a really good way to get going. And I have actually done this, and it works really good just in a pallet composter made from 4 pallets. Put a couple of glass skylights on the top, and just the heat coming up from my compost was enough to start the seedlings really well. There's also these heating cables, which work really good. The heating cable that has a thermostat on it will have a little black bump with an orange button on it. So that is the thermostat. If it doesn't have that black bump with the orange button, then you have to actually buy a thermostat as well. So be careful for that, like if you get one used or something. You can also use the heating mats again, but even these heating coils, and this is styrofoam, nasty styrofoam, in between it, you could use wood just as well, it'd be fine. Anything to give it a little bit of a heat, get your plants started quickly. The quicker your seeds start, the happier they'll be. The less chance that something will go wrong. Up against the house is always good because the heat will reflect off the house. There's lots of ways to store heat, and this is, a full-blown greenhouse. They've actually found that a lot of little containers hold and give off heat better than some big containers. So again, those plastic water bottles. The other thing that I've seen is, I have a few presentations, but I don't always include everything and I keep changing them. But the other thing that you can do, if you have something that will shelter your stuff in the winter, all you need to do is throw some cloth over it to shade it in the summer. So if you're germinating stuff in the summer and it really happens to be a sunny summer, you can drop a cloth over it as well. For a cold frame, I've actually seen people, for a really cold night, plug in a crock pot, like a slow cooker. Put a slow cooker in your cold frame with some water in it. I mean, you could even do oatmeal in it, right? Overnight, you have your oatmeal in the morning, go out to your cold frame and grab your oatmeal from your slow cooker. Right? So, great ideas just to keep things warm. What people have been doing for their fruit trees on the other side of the island, like they've been growing some citrus more and more, is the old-fashioned Christmas lights, not the modern ones, because the modern ones don't give off much heat, but the old-fashioned ones that give off heat, they wrap them around the branches of their citrus trees. So that's another thing you can put in your cold frame, is these old Christmas lights. We used to keep our punk from freezing in Port Albion with just a single incandescent bulb because they gave off so much heat. So lots of different ways to put that little bit of extra heat when the temperature does happen to go below zero. Plants are up, you have to take the shade off, but just to get through the germination stage. An umbrella, old umbrella, great use for an old umbrella. So, yeah, the cloches, mulch, 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 mulch. I want to get to some planting with you, that's why I'm hurrying. And this is an idea that I keep trying to make work, and lots of people keep trying to make work. I don't know anybody who's been successful at that. It looks like a great way to grow potatoes in a very small space. The idea is you keep dropping wooden boxes on top of it and filling it with soil. For one, where the heck do you get all that soil? Right? You can use wood chips, but still. The other thing, as you build this up, the center of gravity is higher and higher and higher, so it uses more and more water. So it's a very water-intensive way. So although this looks like it's a good idea, I would love to see it work. So again, if someone makes it work, let me know. So that's kind of how you do it. And I mean, it looks like you should get like 100 pounds of potatoes out of this. But again, I've never seen this actually succeed.
I tried it in tires for a couple of years because people said, oh, you just throw them in. You know, I had a bunch of tires and I think I watered them too much. It just came out soggy. Not a lot of...
And there's not a lot of air circulation in those tires either, right? So watering them too much, that's unusual really, but it might be just that there's not enough air.
Yeah, okay. I watered them just like everything else, but
Yeah.
I was told later, don't water them so much.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, if you do manage to grow some tomatoes or peppers, if you grow them in containers, bring them inside. Peppers are actually perennial. So you can bring them inside, they'll continue to produce. You put them out the following year and they'll produce even more. I find that jalapenos do okay in cooler temperatures. That was the only pepper I could grow in Port Albion. The other one was one called Gypsy, which is like a banana-shaped pepper, and that managed to work. Lots of herbs, containers. Herbs can go in containers very easily, under lights. And just, again, it's just sort of energizing the food that you might, we can't grow all our food, but if we just even include little bits of energized food that is fresh and has been grown with high quality compost and has, just been harvested right before we eat it, we really can increase our nutrition levels and subsequently our health, right? And food security. So I really encourage you to grow more vegetables. Here's some books that are really good. Winter Harvest by Elliot Coleman. He puts a cold frame inside a cold frame, inside a greenhouse. Four Season Harvest is another book by him. This is my favorite all-around gardening book. How to grow more vegetables and fruits, nuts, berries, grains, and other crops than you ever thought possible on less land than you can imagine. That's all in the title. And it's by John Jeavons, and he really does the intensive gardening. He talks about double digging, which was really helpful for me here. And really talks about a lot about crop succession, how to get lots of different crops out of the same area, and also expands your brain as far as what you might try to want to grow. So that's really wonderful. This is this Winter Gardening in the Maritime Northwest was the first book I ever found on growing vegetables year-round, and this was the book that I used in Port Albion when I lived there, is this Winter Gardening in the Maritime Northwest by Binda Colebrook. And she was in Seattle, and the temperatures and the conditions here are very similar actually to Seattle. It's just that little bit warmer than even the rest of the island, right? So that one was also a really helpful book. I think she's put out subsequent editions. For a while it was out of print, but I think it's back in print now. Carolyn Harriet has done a book. Also, Linda Gilkinson has done a book. So those are also books that you can look for. Also, there's one that's really inspiring, and it's not really relevant to this climate, but it's inspiring anyway. There's a woman named Nikki Jabbour, Jabbour. She grows year-round in Nova Scotia. Year-round Nova Scotia. So if she can do it, you guys can do it. Because not only is Nova Scotia cold, it's cloudy and rainy and sleety. And my daughter lives there and she cries every spring. And she's not here. So thank you very much. And